The funeral ended at 2 p.m. The eviction notice arrived at 4. Same day. I was still in my black dress, still holding the single white rose I had taken from his casket because I could not bring myself to leave it behind. Still in the parking lot of the cemetery, standing beside my car, unable to make myself get in and drive away from the place where I had just left my husband in the ground. My phone buzzed. A text from my neighbor. Someone just taped something to your front door. Looked official. You okay? I drove home in 17 minutes. I do not remember the drive. What I remember is pulling into the driveway of the house I had shared with Nathan for 9 years. The house where we had brought our daughter home from the hospital. Where we had painted the kitchen 3 times because we could never agree on the right shade of yellow and eventually laughed about it and chose wrong on purpose. Where Nathan had built the bookshelf in the living room that was slightly crooked and that I had loved precisely because of the crookedness. I remember the white envelope taped to the front door. I remember my hands still holding the white rose, pulling the envelope free. I remember reading the first line. Notice of eviction. You are hereby required to vacate the premises within 30 days. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down on my front step, still in my black dress, still holding the white rose, still in the particular suspended state of someone who has buried their husband 4 hours ago, and I sat there for a long time. My neighbor found me there 20 minutes later. She sat down beside me without being asked. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "Who sent it?" I looked at the envelope. The return address was a legal firm I did not recognize, but the name on the account, the name of the person who had initiated the eviction proceedings, was one I recognized immediately. My mother-in-law, Patricia, who had stood beside me at the graveside 2 hours ago, who had held my hand during the service, who had said "Pa" in front of 40 people, in the particular carrying voice of grief, that Nathan would have wanted us to support each other, who had apparently filed the eviction notice 3 days before the funeral, before her son was in the ground. Stay with me, because what I found out about the house and about Nathan, about the 9 years, I thought I understood completely and is something that took me to my lowest point and brought me back with everything I needed. I did not call Patricia that evening. I called my sister. Then my attorney, a woman named Claire, who had handled our mortgage paperwork years ago and whose number I had never deleted because some numbers you keep without knowing why. Claire answered on the second ring. I read her the notice. She was quiet for a moment. "Who is the petitioning party?" she said. "My mother-in-law," I said. "Patricia Lawson." Another pause, longer. "Emma," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Whose name is on the deed to your house?" I opened my mouth to answer, and stopped. Because the answer, I had assumed for 9 years without ever directly verifying, suddenly felt less certain than it had 30 seconds ago. "Nathan's," I said. "And mine? We bought it together." "Are you certain?" Claire said. I was not certain. I had never looked at the deed directly. Nathan had handled the paperwork, not because I could not, but because he had wanted to, because managing those details had been important to him in the particular way of someone who takes pride in providing. I had signed things. I had not examined what I was signing with the attention I would later wish I had given it. "I'll pull the records tonight," Claire said. "Don't contact anyone. Don't respond to the notice. Let me call you in the morning." She called at 7 a.m. The house was in Nathan's name only. Not because of anything deliberate. Not initially. The purchase had been made before we were married. Nathan had bought it as a single buyer. Had intended to add my name after the wedding. Had mentioned it in the vague way of something that was on a list of things to do that never quite rose to the top. 9 years. My name had never been added. And Patricia, who had apparently known this, who had apparently been the one to bring it to the attention of the legal firm 3 days before her son's funeral, had filed the eviction notice as the next of kin inheriting her son's estate, because Nathan had not updated his will, the same will he had written before we were married, before our daughter, before 9 years of a life that had been entirely ours in every way, except the one that was now, on a piece of paper taped to my front door, being used against me. I sat with that information for a long time, not crying, not yet. The crying would come later, in the particular wave of it that arrives when you have been strong for long enough and your body finally insists. In that moment, I was very still and very quiet and running through 9 years of a marriage, looking for the thing I should have seen. What I found, when I looked clearly, without the comfort of hindsight, being unfair to a man who was no longer here to explain himself, was not deception. It was simply incompleteness. The particular incompleteness of someone who had loved completely and had not attended to the paperwork of that love with the same completeness. Nathan had not protected me deliberately. He had simply not gotten around to it. And his mother, who had known, who had waited, who had filed 3 days before the funeral, had gotten around to it first. I thought about Patricia holding my hand at the graveside. Nathan would have wanted us to support each other. I thought about the white rose, and something, very quiet, very cold, very certain, settled in me. Claire was excellent. I want to say that clearly, because what came next required someone excellent, and I had been lucky enough to have her number in my phone. She identified 3 things immediately. The first was the marriage. 9 years of legal marriage in our state created rights that the deed alone did not eliminate. Spousal rights, the particular legal. Recognition that a home shared for 9 years by a married couple does not simply revert to one party's family, because the paperwork was incomplete. The second was our daughter. Elena, 7 years old. Nathan's child created an additional layer of legal consideration that Patricia's attorney had apparently not fully accounted for in the filing. The third was a document Claire found in the county records, filed 18 months ago, in Nathan's name, a deed amendment, incomplete, unsigned on my side, because Nathan had started the process and had not finished it. But started, documented, with his clear intention recorded in the filing. He tried, Claire said. He started the process 18 months ago. He just didn't complete it. I sat with that. 18 months ago, during the period when his health had first started, showing signs of before the diagnosis, before we knew what we were dealing with. He had started. He had just run out of time. Can we use it? I said. Yes, Claire said. We can use it. The legal response to Patricia's eviction notice was filed within 72 hours. Claire was thorough in the particular way of someone who has identified an injustice and has the tools to address it in the professional satisfaction of using them correctly. The spousal rights argument, the minor child consideration, the incomplete deed amendment that documented Nathan's clear intention, all of it assembled into a response that was, as Claire described it to me, with a precision I found deeply reassuring, airtight. Patricia's attorney requested a meeting. I attended with Claire. Patricia was there, across a conference table, not the graveside, not the kitchen where she had drunk my coffee and held my hand and performed grief, a conference table. With attorneys, in the particular clarity of a room where performance is harder to sustain. She looked different, not smaller, I want to be precise, not diminished in any dramatic way, but different. The particular difference of someone who has been seen doing something they did not expect to be seen doing. Her attorney spoke first. Adjustments to their position, acknowledgement of the spousal rights complexity, a willingness to discuss the particular language of people who have discovered that what they filed was not as straightforward as they believed. Claire spoke second, clearly, completely, without drama. When the legal language was finished, when the positions had been stated and the documentation had been presented, and the room had understood what the room was dealing with, I spoke. Not to Patricia's attorney. To Patricia. Nathan tried to add my name to the deed, I said. 18 months ago. He started the process. He ran out of time. She looked at the table. You knew that, I said. You knew about the incomplete filing. That's why you moved when you did, before the estate was fully settled, before anyone had time to look closely. She said nothing. I'm not going to tell you what I think about that, I said. You already know. What I'm going to tell you is that your son loved this house. He loved what we built in it, and whatever you believed about what should happen after he was gone, he would not have wanted this. She looked up, and in her eyes, briefly, genuinely, before she composed them back into something more manageable, I saw it. She knew. The eviction proceedings were withdrawn 2 weeks later. The deed was amended and completed properly, with full legal documentation, through the estate proceedings. What Nathan had started 18 months ago was finished. My name on the deed, my home confirmed as mine, Elna's home confirmed as hers. The bookshelf in the living room is still slightly crooked. I have thought many times about whether to fix it. I have decided not to. Patricia and I do not have a relationship. I do not believe we will. What happened? The filing, the timing, the hand held at the graveside 2 hours after the notice was prepared, is not something I have found a way to move past in the direction of anything resembling closeness. What I have found is something I did not expect. Gratitude. For Claire. For my neighbor who found me on the front step. For my sister who came immediately and stayed. For the number I had kept in my phone without knowing why. And for Nathan. For the incomplete filing. The process he had started 18 months ago. In the particular way of someone who was doing what he could with the time he had. He had not finished it, but he had started it, and the starting had mattered more than either of us could have known. Here is what a white rose and an eviction notice and a conference table taught me. The people who move against you in your lowest moment, who file papers while you are standing at a graveside, are counting on your grief making you smaller. They are counting on the weight of loss making you unable to fight. Grief does not make you smaller. It makes you certain. Certain about what matters. Certain about what you will protect. Certain about the home you built and the life you lived in the name that belongs on the deed. Fight from that certainty. It is the strongest ground there is. After burying my husband, they handed me an eviction notice. I was still in my black dress, still holding his white rose, and I fought. From the front step of my home, all the way to the conference table, and I brought every piece of it home.